Virgo, there are moments when something shifts in the space between two people, not loudly, um, not dramatically, but in a way that begins to make itself felt before any words are ever spoken. And some of you right now may already be sensing that, a quiet pull, an unfinished feeling, something that hasn't been said yet, but that seems to be gathering weight somewhere just beneath the surface of your daily life. If this found you today, something in you may already know why. A theme that appears strongly in this reflection is the energy of unspoken communication, the kind that lives in the silences between people, in the message that was almost sent, in the conversation that was rehearsed 100 times in someone's mind but never quite made it into words. And what's interesting is that this kind of unspoken energy doesn't simply disappear because it goes unexpressed. It tends to linger. It circulates quietly in the background of a connection, waiting for a moment when the conditions mm, feel right enough to finally surface. Some of you may be in a situation where someone in your life, someone whose presence carries emotional weight for you, seems to be hovering at the edge of a disclosure, not necessarily something dramatic, but something real, something they've been holding privately, possibly for longer than you realize, and that may be moving closer to the surface now. It's worth sitting with what that might feel like, because a pattern that sometimes emerges in situations like this is that the person receiving the communication is often more prepared for it than they think. There's a kind of quiet readiness that develops in people who have been paying attention, even unconsciously, to the emotional undercurrents around them. And many of you have been paying attention, perhaps more than you've given yourself credit for. This reflection invites you to consider what you've already sensed about this connection that you haven't yet allowed yourself to fully acknowledge, and whether the hesitation to acknowledge it is protecting you or simply keeping something important at a distance. An energy that may be present here is one of emotional recalibration, the sense that someone is quietly reorganizing their interior world, reconsidering something they once thought was settled. And this kind of internal movement, when it happens in another person, often produces exactly the kind of charged silence that precedes genuine communication, the kind of silence that isn't emptiness. It's more like a held breath. Um, there's something almost haunting about that particular quality of waiting. The way certain connections can feel suspended in a kind of atmospheric tension where something is clearly present between two people, but neither has yet found the door through which to walk toward it. A theme appearing here is that door beginning to feel less sealed than it once did, not forced open, not broken through, simply less resistant. For some of you, what's being reflected in this moment is the possibility of hearing something that reshapes how you understand a relationship or a situation you've been navigating. And it's possible that what you hear whenever it arrives may require you to sit with it rather than immediately react to it. Because sometimes the most meaningful communications aren't the ones that demand an instant response. They're the ones that ask you to go quiet for a moment and feel what's actually true for you. A pattern that sometimes emerges in situations like this is that the person waiting to hear something has already, on some level, prepared their own response, not necessarily in words, but in the body, in the way the nervous system has been quietly rehearsing for a conversation that the conscious mind hasn't fully admitted it's expecting. That preparation is worth honoring. It's a form of inner wisdom that often goes unrecognized. This reflection invites you to consider what your body already knows about this situation that your mind has been slow to accept, and whether the two are finally beginning to arrive at the same understanding. There's a particular quality to the energy present in this reflection that feels connected to the concept of courage, not the loud, declarative kind of courage, the quieter kind. The kind that moves someone to say a true thing even when the outcome is uncertain, even when the vulnerability of saying it feels enormous. And a theme appearing here is that someone in your world may be building toward exactly that kind of moment, moving slowly, perhaps, navigating their own internal resistance, but moving nonetheless. Here's the thing about emotional courage. When it finally finds its expression, it rarely arrives the way we imagined it would. It doesn't tend to come with grand gestures or perfect timing. It comes in ordinary moments. A message sent late at night, a conversation that begins with something small and then unexpectedly becomes something much larger. An admission that arrives almost sideways, as if the person saying it surprised even themselves. And this is where it gets subtle, because when communication like this arrives honest, perhaps overdue, carrying the weight of everything that wasn't said before it, the temptation can be to receive it through the filter of old pain, through the accumulated scar tissue of previous misunderstandings or disappointments, and an energy that may be present in this moment is an invitation to try as much as possible to receive what's coming with something closer to openness than armor, not naivety, not the abandonment of discernment, but a genuine willingness to hear what is actually being said rather than only what you've been bracing for. This reflection invites you to consider whether the emotional armor you've been wearing around this connection is still serving its original purpose, or whether it may now be keeping out something that deserves to be let in. A pattern that sometimes surfaces in moments like this is the theme of timing, specifically the gap between when something becomes emotionally true for someone and when they find the capacity to express it. That gap can be disorienting for the person waiting on the receiving end. It can feel like absence or indifference or even a kind of quiet rejection. But the energy present here suggests something different. It suggests that what may have looked like distance was actually a kind of interior work, a slow, sometimes painful process of getting honest with oneself before attempting honesty with someone else. And there's something quietly significant about that, because it means that what may be approaching the communication, the disclosure, the words finally finding their shape isn't impulsive. It isn't reactive. It's something that has been considered, turned over in the dark, tested against the question, is this true? And answered, apparently, with yes. A theme appearing here is the relief that sometimes accompanies being truly heard, not just acknowledged, not just responded to, but genuinely heard in that deep, almost cellular way that reminds a person they are not as alone in their experience as they may have feared. Some of you may be approaching a moment like that. A moment where a conversation, however it arrives, whatever form it takes, closes a distance that has been quietly aching for some time. Not because it solves everything, but because it makes the truth between two people visible. And visible truth, even when it's complicated, tends to be easier to navigate than the kind that lives only in shadows and implication. This reflection invites you to consider what it would mean for you, not for anyone else, but for you to finally have clarity about something that has been living in the uncertain space between what you know and what you've only been allowed to sense. Whatever is approaching in your life right now, whatever communication, whatever shift, whatever quiet rearrangement of the emotional landscape around you, the most important thing this reflection can offer is simply this: you are not required to brace for it. You are not required to meet it with either desperate hope or protective skepticism. You're allowed to simply receive it, to let it land, to sit with what it means in the full context of who you are and what you actually need. The authority over how you respond, what you do with what you hear, and what you choose to build or release from this moment forward that belongs entirely to you, not to the situation, not to the other person, not to any outside force. Some realizations don't arrive with announcements. They arrive in the quiet, in the space between one breath and the next, when the mind finally becomes still enough to hear what has been true all along. Trust what becomes clear in that stillness. It tends to know more than the noise does.